Story time about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kind of get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy, and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie, and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me, and my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, like for part 2. Part 2 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, the guy was being super flirty with me, inviting me to the movies when my mom wasn't home and all that stuff. Well, then it led to more than just that. By the way, this guy did not have a job, so he was home with me 24/7. And I was doing online school. So we were in the house by ourselves, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, like I said, it led to more, and we started doing the nasty and stuff. Ew, just, yeah. Well, the one day after we got done doing the nasty in my mom's room, we had fell asleep. And yes, we did not have clothes on. Well, at 2 in the morning, I hear someone pounding on the bedroom door, and my mom worked night shifts. So we get up, he hurries up and gets dressed and tells me to hide under the bed. And he opens the door, and it's my mom's sister. My sister literally lived in the apartment next door. And she was like, oh yeah, neither of you were answering the phone, so she wanted me to check on you guys. Like, where's Elena? And I'm still under the bed naked, like for part 3. Part 3 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, I'm laying under the bed, no clothes on. She asks where I am. And he's like, oh, she should be in her room. So he goes looking for me everywhere with her. And he's like, oh, well, maybe she's outside on the patio. And I don't know why the hell my mom's sister had a key to our apartment anyways. But she's still looking for me in the apartment, and she looks under the fucking bed. And at first she's like, oh my god, what did he do to you? And I'm trying to tell her nothing, like I made that decision on my own. So she calls my mom right away. My mom comes home. She's screaming at me, and she kicks me out. So I go to my grandma's house, and I told my grandma what happened. And my grandma calls her, and she's like, it's not her fault that you gave her daddy issues. And I'm like, bruh, what the fuck? Child, anyways. So then she goes on Facebook and starts posting about how I'm a whore and a slut and how, like, it isn't her boyfriend's fault at all. So now I live...
Story time of how I found out that my mom was putting our dad's ashes in our food. Yep, our mom would put our dead dad's ashes in our dinner. So basically, after my dad died, my mom showed zero emotion. It's like she really didn't care at all. Like, she kind of wanted it to happen. His death was like an unsolved case, and nobody knows how he actually died. And now that I get to think about it, it might have been my mom, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. And if it was her and she sees this video, I don't want to end up like him. Anyways, back to the story. So about a month after he died, she would always post a picture of me and my brother's dinner with the caption, "You'll always be with them." Literally every single night. And honestly, nobody really caught on. All the comments were like, we're praying, this and that. Until one day I was just sitting on the couch and I look over and my mom was pouring something into the mashed potatoes. So I go a little closer and I see her pouring the ashes of my dad into our mashed potatoes. Listen, this story only gets 10 times worse, so like for a part 2. Part 2 of how my mom was putting my dad's ashes in me and my brother's dinner. Continuing on with the story, after I see her literally pouring my dad's ashes into our mashed potatoes, and I mean, this lady literally sees me staring at her pouring the ashes into our mashed potatoes, and she, like, doesn't even say anything. I was just, a little shocked. So after that, I just kept quiet until after dinner, and I was mad at my brother that night, so I just let him eat the mashed potatoes. So after dinner, I went up to my mom and asked her why she was putting our dad's ashes in our food. And her exact words were, "Your father was a bad man. He wasn't meant to be here." I said, "What does that have to do with you putting his ashes in our dinner?" She goes, "It will just cleanse your soul. The witches told me to feed my children's father to them." Bishwa? I ended up telling my brother, but then me and him decided not to ever say anything ever again because we don't want her little spirits telling them to do the same thing with us, so...
Story time about my shitty ass ex-boyfriend. So a little background information. My ex and I have been dating for about 2 years. And throughout those 2 years, he was a dick. He would cheat on me, talk to other girls more than me, but of course I pretended that everything was perfect in my relationship. I would brag to all these people about how my relationship was so good, blah blah blah, and everything else. Because it's embarrassing whenever bitches can talk shit because your relationship is very toxic. Like, listen to this bullshit. The whole 2 years we were dating, I had over 10 girls DM me on Instagram saying that they screwed my boyfriend at his house. I never confronted him about it. I was just one of those girls that cared way too much about what everybody else thought. Okay, now fast forward. And it was a Friday at school, and Thanksgiving break was the following day. And him and I have this whole plan to spend the whole break together, because literally a week before that, he was on vacation in North Carolina for 2 whole weeks. Well, instead of going with him after school, I decided to go home, get an overnight bag like for part 2. Story time about my shitty ass ex-boyfriend. So a little background information. My ex and I have been dating for about 2 years. And throughout those 2 years, he was a dick. He would cheat on me, talk to other girls more than me, but of course I pretended that everything was perfect in my relationship. I would brag to all these people about how my relationship was so good, blah blah blah, and everything else. Because it's embarrassing whenever bitches can talk shit because your relationship is very toxic. Like, listen to this bullshit. The whole 2 years we were dating, I had over 10 girls DM me on Instagram saying that they screwed my boyfriend at his house. I never confronted him about it. I was just one of those girls that cared way too much about what everybody else thought. Okay, now fast forward. And it was a Friday at school, and Thanksgiving break was the following day. And him and I have this whole plan to spend the whole break together, because literally a week before that, he was on vacation in North Carolina for 2 whole weeks. Well, instead of going with him after school, I decided to go home, get an overnight bag like for part 2. Part 2 about my shitty ex-boyfriend. So like I said, the original plan was for us to go together to his house after school. But I was like, I'm going to be spending the whole week over there. I should probably pack some clothes and get a shower. So after school, he drove me to my house. And he said that his parents wanted to have dinner together, so he had to go back to his house. And he would pick me up later. So when I got to my house, I got ready and everything, blah, blah, blah. And by this time, it was like 8 o'clock. Well, I kept texting and calling him, asking him where he's at, if he's coming to get me still. Then I realized that none of my text messages were going through. So then I go to text him on Snap. And what do you know? I couldn't find him on there. And then I call him off my mom's phone. He answers the phone and hangs up right away. Well, we were supposed to have a little party at his house too, that all of my friends were going to. So I texted every single one of them. None of them answered the phone. And I remembered that my one friend had shared her location with me before. So I went and looked at her location and where was she at? My boyfriend's house. So while I sat at home crying that whole week, he was throwing parties and cheating on me with my friends. And when we went back to school, he acted like we were never in a relationship.
Story time of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. My older sister never really liked me as a child. We were never close. I never knew why, but I was guessing it was because of the 10-year age gap. But I'm pretty sure she hated me because she couldn't even look me in the eye. I cannot make this up. She would not look me in the eye. But she never really talked to my parents either. She kind of just kept to herself all the time. Sometimes I have vivid memories of when we were younger and she would always be arguing with my parents about something, and I always thought it had something to do with me. Well, I was right. It had everything to do with me because eventually my sister turned 18 and she moved out. For 2 years, I didn't talk to her at all. I honestly don't even think I had her number saved, and I'm pretty sure that she didn't have mine. Well, 2 years later, and I was 10 at the time, she reached out to me via social media. I'm not sure how she found my Instagram name, but it was just my name, so she probably just typed that in and found me. She DM'd me and told me that she wanted to talk about something very important and that she would like to talk over the phone. So we exchanged numbers and we called that same night. And she told me that when she was younger, my dad had taken advantage of her and gotten her pregnant and had me. This is part 2 of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. So like I said, my older sister had reached out to me via social media and told me that she was actually my mother. And so after we got off the phone that same night, I lost it at dinner and I went off on my parents and I screamed at them. And I told them that I would go to the police and tell them everything and I would tell them the truth unless they just let me live with my older sister. And they tried to explain themselves, and their reasoning was that they wanted to keep the family together because of their traditional values. And it would have just made their lives a lot harder going through all the court proceedings, so they just kept the family together. And so they clearly didn't want me to go into the police, so they said that I could go live with my older sister. So she came to get me, but she lived in a different state, so it kind of took a while. I still had to stay in the house for like a week or so before she came, but I packed all my stuff and I was ready to go. And when we went back to where she lived, we immediately called the police and told them everything. Fast forward a little bit, they did some DNA testing. My sister's DNA matched as my biological mother's, and then my dad was my biological father, and they saw how the ages just didn't match properly, so they took my father to jail.
Story time of the most dirtiest college roommate ever. By the way, we're calling her Jessie. So I moved in before Jessie and I get settled and decorate. The next day, she comes and throws her bag on the bed, then leaves. I thought it was weird because she didn't even say anything to me. Couple hours later, she comes back and I'm like, hello? And she's like, my bad, and comes gives me a hug. She smelled very bad. She starts unpacking all of her clothes and blankets, but they smelled like mildew. Anyways, a week later, there's this party going on for freshmen, and she goes, but I stay in because I had a migraine. I told her that when she comes back, can she keep the light off? Now it's 2 a.m., and she comes back in very loud, uses the bathroom, then goes to sleep. And now I'm up, so I got up to use the bathroom too. When I sit down on the toilet, I feel something very squishy. It was dark because, like I said, I had a migraine. I get up, turn the light on, and I was sitting in her shit.
One day, I went to my friend's birthday party. We're gonna